Take the old man off the list. That's what she said. My son's bride pointed at my name on the seating chart and told the planner to erase it like I was a typo. The old man was me, Ethan's father, the man who raised him alone after his mother died in my arms. I stood in that doorway 63 years old, and I smiled. I said, "Understood." Then I walked out without another word. What none of them knew was that the wedding was booked on a $12 million estate that still legally belonged to me. Before you watch how this ends, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe love should be unconditional, but respect should never be optional, subscribe and stay with me until the very last minute. I was standing in my kitchen holding a phone that had just gone dead in my hand, and I realized I couldn't feel my own fingers. Let me back up. My name is William Carter. I'm 63 years old. And 1 week before my only son's wedding, I found out I wasn't invited. Not, "We forgot to mail your invitation." Not, "There was a mix-up with the seating." I was banned, by name. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and if I don't tell you who I am first, none of what I did next is going to make sense. So let me tell you the truth plain the way I'd tell it if you were sitting across from me at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold between us. I built everything I own with these 2 hands. I didn't inherit a dime. My father was a mechanic who drank most of what he earned, and my mother worked nights cleaning offices downtown so we could keep the lights on. When I was 17, I got a job carrying lumber for a framing crew, and the foreman, an old Marine named Gus, looked at me on my first day and said, "Carter, you either work like you mean it or you go home." I worked like I meant it. Every single day for the next 45 years. 35 years ago, I bought a used pickup truck with a cracked windshield and a toolbox that was more rust than metal, and I started Carter Construction with nothing but that truck, my back, and a phone number I'd written on 100 flyers I stapled to telephone poles myself. The first winter almost killed me. I remember standing on a roof in January with my hands so frozen I couldn't grip the nail gun, and I told myself, one more house. Just build one more house, and you'll figure out the rest. I built one more house, then another, then 100 more. But I want to be honest with you about something, because this whole story falls apart if you think I did it for the money. I didn't. I did it for a boy named Ethan. Ethan is my son. And when I say he was my whole world, I don't mean it the way people say it on greeting cards. I mean it the way a man means it when he's held his child in the middle of the night and promised him things he wasn't sure he could deliver. His mother, Sarah, was the love of my life. We got married young, too young, everybody said, and we proved everybody wrong for 19 years. She was the soft to my hard. When I came home angry from a job that went sideways, she'd put her hand flat on my chest and say, "Breathe, William. The house isn't going anywhere, and neither am I." Then one October, she started getting tired. Just tired, we thought. Then it wasn't just tired. Ethan was 12 when I sat him down and told him his mother was sick. He looked up at me with these big eyes and asked me the question no father is ever ready for. "Is Mom going to die?" I could have lied. God knows I wanted to. But Sarah made me promise I'd never lie to that boy, so I got down on my knees so we were eye to eye, and I said, "I don't know, buddy. But whatever happens, you and me, we're a team. And a team doesn't quit on each other. You hear me?" He nodded. And he cried. And I held him until he stopped. Sarah passed away 6 months later. She died in a hospital bed with my hand in her left hand and Ethan's in her right. Her last words to me were, "Don't let him grow up angry, William. Promise me." "I promise," I said. I have spent 30 years trying to keep that promise, and this story is about the day I found out I might have kept it too well. After Sarah died, it was just the 2 of us, me and Ethan, a construction man with dirt under his nails and a 12-year-old boy who cried himself to sleep for the better part of a year. I didn't know how to be a mother and a father at the same time. Nobody teaches you that. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I showed up. I showed up to every parent-teacher conference in my work clothes sawdust still on my jeans because I'd leave a job site early and drive across town so I wouldn't miss it. I showed up to his baseball games and cheered so loud the other parents laughed at me. I showed up at 2 in the morning when he had a fever sitting on the edge of his bed with a cold washcloth telling him the same thing I told him the day I learned his mother was dying. You and me, buddy. We're a team. I want to tell you about one night in particular because it's the night that keeps coming back to me now. Ethan was maybe 15. He'd gotten into a fight at school. Some kid said something about his mother being dead, and Ethan swung. Got suspended for 3 days. When I picked him up from the principal's office, he wouldn't look at me. Wouldn't say a word the whole ride home. Finally, I pulled the truck over on the side of the road and shut off the engine. You want to tell me what happened? I asked. He said Mom being dead was probably a relief, Ethan said, staring out the window. Said she probably got tired of us. I felt something white-hot flash through my chest, but I remembered my promise to Sarah. You know that's not true, I said. I know. So why'd you hit him? He turned to me and his voice cracked. Because I couldn't hit the part of me that was scared he was right. I'll never forget that. 15 years old, and he had more honesty in him than most grown men I know. I reached over and put my hand on the back of his neck, the way I used to when he was little. Listen to me. Your mother loved you more than her own life, and I have loved you every single second of every single day since the moment you were born. Nobody, I don't care who they are. Nobody gets to make you feel like you're a burden. You understand me? Not ever. He nodded. And then quiet. He said the words I carried in my chest for the next 15 years. Dad, I hope I can be half the man you are one day. That was my boy. So you tell me, how does a boy like that end up on a phone call telling his father he can't come to his wedding? I've asked myself that question 1,000 times. And the honest answer, the one that took me the longest to accept, is this. It didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, the way rot gets into good wood. You don't see it until you put your weight down and the whole board gives out from under you. The board gave out on a Tuesday. Ethan was getting married in 9 days. To a woman named Emily. Let me tell you about Emily, and I'm going to try to be fair, because bitterness makes a man unreliable, and I want you to trust me. Emily came from money. Old money. The kind of family that has a summer house and a lawyer on retainer and knows which fork to use for the salad. I met her about 2 years ago when Ethan brought her home for dinner, and I liked her at first. She was smart. She laughed at my jokes. She called me Mr. Carter and shook my hand firmly. But there were moments, small ones, the kind you talk yourself out of. The first dinner I made my grandmother's pot roast. Same recipe I'd been making Ethan his whole life. Emily took 2 bites, set her fork down and said, "This is so homey." And she smiled when she said it. But it wasn't a compliment. I've been reading people my whole career. You don't survive in construction without learning to tell when a man is lying to your face about a payment. And I knew a dig when I heard one. I let it go. A few months later, we were all at a restaurant, and the waiter accidentally spilled water on the table. I laughed and said, "No harm done happens to the best of us." And Emily leaned over to Ethan and said just loud enough for me to hear, "Does your dad always talk to the help like they're old friends?" The help, like the young man clearing our plates, wasn't somebody's son. I let that go too. I let a lot of things go, because I told myself the same thing every father tells himself: he loves her, so I'll love her. His happiness is my happiness. Who am I to judge? But there's a difference between loving someone and letting them erase you. And I didn't learn that difference until it was almost too late. So, 9 days before the wedding, Tuesday, I was in my kitchen making a pot of coffee, and I was in a good mood, because that morning I'd finalized the paperwork on the greatest gift I would ever give anyone in my life. I'll tell you about the gift in a minute. Just remember, it's coming. My phone rang. It was Ethan. I picked up before the second ring, because I always pick up when it's him. "Hey son," I said. "I was just thinking about you. 9 days, huh? You getting nervous yet?" There was a pause, a long one. "Ethan? You there?" "Yeah, Dad. I'm here." Something was off in his voice. Flat. Careful. The voice a man uses when he's rehearsed what he's about to say. "What time do you need me on Saturday?" I asked. I figured I'd come early, help with whatever needs doing. You know me, I can't just stand around in a suit. Put me to work. Silence. Ethan. Dad. He took a breath. I need to talk to you about Saturday. Okay. I'm listening. And then my son said the words that split my life into a before and an after. I don't think you should come to the wedding. I laughed. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain refused to process what my ears had just heard. That's a good one. What time? Seriously. 6:05. Dad, I'm not joking. The coffee pot finished gurgling behind me. I remember that sound. I remember gripping the edge of the counter. What do you mean you're not joking? I mean, his voice dropped. I don't think it's a good idea for you to be there. I stood very still. Why not? I asked. And I kept my voice level. God knows how, because inside I was already falling. It's complicated. Uncomplicate it for me, son. There was a long silence, and then he said it. Emily doesn't want you there. I closed my eyes. Emily, I repeated. Yeah. My daughter-in-law. The woman I welcomed into this family. The woman I've had at my dinner table. She doesn't want me at my own son's wedding. Dad. Why, Ethan? And now my voice did crack just a little, and I hated it. Give me a reason. You look me in the eye. Well, you can't. We're on the phone, but you tell me straight. Why doesn't she want your father there? And this is the part I've replayed 1,000 times. This is the sentence that I will hear in my head until the day I die. He said quietly, almost like he was ashamed of it. She thinks you won't fit in with her family. I didn't say anything. So he kept going, and every word was another nail. Her side of the family, they're different, Dad. They're a certain kind of people, and Emily's worried that it might be uncomfortable. For everyone. A certain kind of people, I said. You know what I mean. No, I don't think I do. Explain it to me. And then my son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the boy I held when his mother died, the boy who said he wanted to be half the man I am, said the thing that broke something inside me that I'm not sure ever fully healed. She thinks you'll embarrass us. Embarrass. Us. I want you to understand what happened in my chest in that moment, because I don't have a better word for it than this. Something went quiet. Not calm. Quiet. Like the silence after a tree comes down. Like the whole forest holding its breath. I looked around my kitchen. The kitchen where I taught that boy to crack an egg. Where I burned 1,000 dinners learning to cook because his mother wasn't there to do it anymore. Where I sat at 4 a.m. after his high school graduation, alone crying tears of pride into my coffee, because I'd done it. I'd gotten him raised, gotten him grown, kept my promise to Sarah. I looked at the wall by the refrigerator where his height was still marked in pencil. Age 6. Age 9. Age 12. The year his mother died, the year the marks stopped for a while, because neither of us had the heart. I would embarrass them. Me. Dad. Ethan's voice came through the phone. Dad, are you still there? Say something. I want to tell you I said something wise. I want to tell you I gave him a speech that turned everything around right there on the phone. I didn't. I did the only thing a man has left when his own child has just told him he's an embarrassment. I kept my dignity. Understood, I said. Dad? I said I understand, Ethan. You don't have to explain anything else. Dad, it's not that I don't want you there, it's just... Ethan. My voice was steady now. Dead steady. Congratulations on your wedding. I hope you have the day you want. Dad, please, can we just... Goodbye, son? And I hung up the phone. Then I stood there in my kitchen, 63 years old, and I discovered I could not feel my own hands. I don't know how long I stood there. Could have been 2 minutes, could have been 20. The coffee got cold, the light changed in the window, and I just stood there holding a dead phone running that word through my head over and over like a splinter I couldn't dig out. Embarrass. I have paid for that boy's entire life, his braces, his car, his college, every cent, no loans, because I swore he'd never start his life in debt the way I did. When his first business idea failed and he lost $40,000, I covered it and never once brought it up again. When he needed a down payment on a ring for the very woman who now wanted me erased, I wrote the check and told him she was a lucky girl, and I would embarrass them. I sat down finally, right there at the kitchen table. And I did something I hadn't done since the day I buried my wife. I put my face in my hands and I let myself feel it. Not anger. Not yet. That came later. In that first hour, it was just grief. Pure, clean grief. Because I understood sitting at that table that the boy who said he wanted to be half the man I am was gone. Somewhere in the last 2 years, without my noticing, he'd been replaced by a man who was ashamed of where he came from. Ashamed of the truck. Ashamed of the sawdust. Ashamed of the father who'd carried lumber in the freezing cold so his son would never have to. And here's the thing. I need you to understand. The thing that took me the longest to admit to myself. I wasn't just grieving my son. I was grieving my part in it. Because somewhere along the way, in trying to give that boy everything, I think I gave him the idea that everything was his by right. I never let him struggle. I never let him want for anything. I paid, and I fixed, and I covered, and I smoothed the road so flat that he forgot roads are supposed to have hills. Sarah's voice came back to me the way it does when I most need it and least expect it. Don't let him grow up angry, William. Well, I'd manage that. He didn't grow up angry. He grew up soft. And someone had gotten inside that softness and told him his father was something to be ashamed of. I sat at that table until the room went dark, and I didn't turn on a light. And somewhere in that darkness, the grief started to change. It cooled. It hardened. It turned into something else. Not rage, I want to be clear, because rage is loud and stupid, and I've never had much use for it. What it turned into was colder than rage. Cleaner. It turned into clarity. Because here's what my son didn't know. Here's the piece he'd forgotten in all his talk about certain kinds of people and fitting in. Remember the gift I told you about, the greatest gift I'd ever give anyone? That Saturday, Ethan and Emily were getting married on a property. A beautiful piece of land with a stone house and 40 acres, and a view that would stop your heart. Their dream venue. The place Emily had picked out and posted about and shown all her certain kind of people. That property was worth $12 million. And I owned it. I'd bought that land 3 years ago, quietly, and I'd been planning for 2 years to sign it over to my son as a wedding gift, the deed, the whole thing free and clear, the way my father never gave me a single thing in his life. It was going to be my legacy. The thing that said more than any words could: everything I ever built, I built for you. The transfer was supposed to be finalized after the wedding. That was the plan Ethan knew about. He thought the paperwork was already done. He thought that land was as good as his. He was standing on ground he thought he owned, telling his father he was an embarrassment. But the paperwork wasn't done. I hadn't signed the final transfer yet. Legally, every blade of grass on those 40 acres still belonged to me. I sat there in the dark, and I turned my phone over in my hand, and I thought about the boy who told me we were a team. And I thought about the man who just told me I'd embarrass them. And for the first time in 30 years, for the first time since I made a promise to a dying woman that I'd love her son with everything I had, I asked myself a question I never in my life thought I would ask. What have I actually taught him? Not what did I give him. I knew what I gave him. I gave him everything. What did I teach him? Did I teach him that respect is earned and not owed? No. I taught him that dad always pays. Did I teach him that the people who love you when you have nothing are worth more than the people who love you when you have everything? No. I bought his love out of trouble every time and called it fatherhood. Did I teach him that a man does not sell out the ones who raised him to impress, the ones who never would have carried lumber in January to keep him warm? No. I taught him none of it, because I loved him too much to let him ever feel the weight of a single hard thing. Well, I picked up the phone. I scrolled to a name I hadn't called in weeks. Margaret Hayes. my attorney of 30 years, the woman who'd drawn up the transfer papers that were sitting unsigned in a folder in her office. It was nearly 9 at night. She answered on the fourth ring, and I could hear the surprise in her voice. "William, everything all right? It's late." "Margaret," I said, and my voice was calm, calmer than I felt. "Are you sitting down?" "I can be. Why?" I looked at the pencil marks on the wall. Age 6, age 9, age 12. "I need you to do 2 things for me," I said. "First, that transfer for the Hillcrest property, the one for Ethan. Do not file it. Do not do anything with it. Put it back in the drawer." There was a pause. "William, that closing is scheduled for—" "I know when it's scheduled. Cancel it." "May I ask what happened?" I closed my eyes. "My son told me I'm not welcome at his wedding. Said I'd embarrass them." I heard Margaret exhale. She'd known Ethan since he was a boy. "Oh, William, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be sharp. Because here's the second thing." I stood up from the table, and as I stood, I felt something settle in me that hadn't been settled in years. Something that felt strangely like peace. "That wedding is happening on my land in 5 days, on property I own, and nobody, not my son, not that girl, not one single person in her certain kind of family has legal authorization to hold anything on it." Silence on the line. "William," Margaret said slowly, "what are you asking me to do?" I looked out the dark window at nothing. "I'm not asking you to do anything cruel," I said. "I don't want revenge, Margaret. I want you to know that. I'm 63 years old, and I've buried the only woman I ever loved, and I do not have it in me to hate my own child." "Then what?" "I want to teach him one lesson I forgot to teach him for 30 years. My hand tightened around the phone. "I want him to learn the difference between his father and his father's money. Because right now, I don't think he knows there is one." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "And how do you want to teach him that?" I smiled. Alone in my dark kitchen, I smiled the same way I'd smiled when I said "understood," and hung up the phone. "By taking away the money," I said, "and seeing if he comes looking for his father." I told her to meet me first thing in the morning. She said she'd be there at 8. Before she hung up, she said one more thing quiet in the voice of a woman who's watched a man make hard decisions for 3 decades. "William, you sure about this?" I looked at those pencil marks on the wall one last time. Age 12, the year the marks stopped. "No," I said honestly. "I'm not sure of anything anymore. But I know one thing. I spent his whole life making the road smooth. Maybe it's time my son learned to walk on rough ground. Even if it breaks my heart to watch." "It might break more than your heart," she said. "It might break him. Or," I said, "it might be the only thing that's ever made him." And I hung up. I stood in that kitchen a while longer. Then I did something I hadn't planned to do. I walked down the hall to Ethan's old bedroom. I'd never turned it into an office, never had the heart. His trophies were still on the shelf. A photo of the 2 of us at his college graduation, both of us grinning like fools. I picked up that photo, and I looked at the young man in it, and I looked at myself younger, prouder, so sure I'd done everything right. "I love you, son," I said out loud to a photograph in an empty house. "I have loved you every single second of every single day since the moment you were born." Then I set the photo down. But I'm done paying for the privilege, and I turned off the light. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and every time I closed my eyes, I heard that word again. Embarrass. It played on a loop, my own son's voice careful and rehearsed saying I would embarrass them. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up on sleep entirely. I got up, made a pot of coffee I didn't drink, and sat at that same kitchen table where my whole life had come apart 12 hours earlier. I thought about calling him back. I want you to know that. 3 separate times I picked up my phone and scrolled to his name, and 3 separate times I set it down. Not because I was proud, because I was afraid. Afraid that if I heard his voice, I'd fold the way I'd folded 1,000 times before. I'd say, "It's all right, son. Forget it." I understand. Tell me where to send the check. Because that's who I'd trained myself to be. The man who fixes it. The man who pays. The man who makes the hard thing go away, so his boy never has to feel it. And I sat there in the dark, and I made myself a promise. Not this time. Whatever else happened, not this time. Margaret Hayes knocked on my door at 8 o'clock sharp, the way she has done everything for 30 years on time and without drama. I opened the door and she took one look at my face and she didn't say good morning. She just said, "You look like hell, William." "I feel worse than I look," I said, and I let her in. Margaret is 71 years old and she has been my lawyer since before Ethan could walk. She drew up the papers when I incorporated the company. She was there when I bought my first commercial lot. She was in the room when Sarah and I wrote our wills, and she was one of the only people at the funeral who didn't try to tell me it would get easier. She just held my hand and said, "It won't get easier, it'll get different." She was right the way she's usually right. She set her briefcase on my kitchen table and she sat down across from me, and for a moment she didn't open it. She just looked at me. "Before I show you what's in here," she said, "I need you to tell me something, and I need the truth. Last night on the phone, you sounded like a man who'd made a decision. Are you still that man this morning? Or did the sun come up and change your mind? Because either answer is fine, William. But I need to know which man I'm talking to." I thought about it. I made myself really think about it, because Margaret deserved that. "I'm the same man," I said. She studied me another second. Then she nodded once, and she opened the briefcase, and she took out a folder, and she slid it across the table to me. "Then you need to see this before we go any further," she said, "because it changes things. And I've been sitting on it since yesterday afternoon trying to decide whether showing it to you makes me a good lawyer or a cruel one." I looked at the folder. It was thin, just a single sheet of paper inside. "What is it?" "It's an email," she said. "It's not from you, and it wasn't sent to you. It landed in my office by accident 4 days ago, and I almost deleted it as a mistake before I read the name at the bottom." I opened the folder. At the top of the page was a name I knew. Emily. My son's bride. And below it was a chain of forwarded messages, the kind that gets tangled up when somebody hits reply all when they meant to hit reply. Margaret's paralegal's email address was in the chain. That's how it had come to us, some crossed wire, some coordinator loop about the wedding logistics that had accidentally swept in a private message, never meant for anyone but the person Emily was writing to. I read it. I want to tell you exactly what it said, because I have it memorized. I'll have it memorized until they put me in the ground. It said, "Once the estate transfer is complete, we won't have to keep pretending. The old man doesn't belong in the life we're building. And honestly, the sooner he understands that, the better. Ethan will come around. He always does." The old man. That's what she called me. Not William. Not Mr. Carter. Not Ethan's father. The old man. I read it a second time. Then a third. And I want to be honest with you about what happened inside me, because I think if you've ever been betrayed by someone you opened your home to, you'll understand. The first read, "I felt nothing." A kind of numb static. The second read, "My hands started to shake just slightly, just at the fingertips." And by the third read, I understood something that turned my stomach cold. This wasn't an insult thrown in a moment of anger. People say cruel things when they're angry, and I've forgiven plenty of them over the years. This was a plan. Once the estate transfer is complete. She was counting on it. She was waiting for it. She had done the arithmetic on my land, on my legacy, on the $12 million I'd been about to hand my son out of love, and she had decided that the moment that money was safely theirs, I could be discarded. And the part that hollowed me out, the part I couldn't stop reading, "Ethan will come around. He always does." She knew my son better than I wanted to admit. She knew the softness in him. She knew that all she had to do was push, and he would bend, and he would keep bending, because I had spent 30 years teaching him that bending was easier than standing. I set the paper down very carefully on the table, like it might break. "When was this sent?" I asked. My voice didn't sound like my own. 2 weeks ago, Margaret said quietly. 2 weeks. So when I'd called Ethan a week ago to ask what time I should arrive, when I'd been standing in my kitchen making coffee and feeling good about the world, this had already been decided. The knife was already in. My son had already agreed to it, or at least agreed not to fight it, and he'd let me go on planning to hand him a fortune while his bride wrote about how the old man didn't belong. I put my hand over my mouth. I didn't cry. I was past crying. But I sat there with my hand over my mouth for a long moment because I was afraid of what would come out of it if I didn't. "William," Margaret said gently, "say something." "He knew," I said from behind my hand. "Ethan knew. This says he'll come around, which means she'd already started working on him. She's been in his ear for weeks, months maybe." I lowered my hand and looked at her. My son didn't just wake up one day and decide his father was an embarrassment, Margaret. Somebody built that in him, brick by brick, and he let them. Margaret didn't try to soften it. That's why I've trusted her for 30 years. She just said, "Yes, I think that's true." I got up from the table. I couldn't sit anymore. I walked to the window and I stood there with my back to her, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Not grief this time. The grief had been last night. This morning it was something with an edge to it. "You know what the worst part is?" I said, still looking out the window. "It's not that she said it. She's a stranger. 2 years I've known her. Strangers are capable of anything. I learned that a long time ago in this business. The worst part is that word. Pretending. We won't have to keep pretending. Which means every dinner at my table was pretending. Every time she called me Mr. Carter and shook my hand. Every thank you for the wonderful meal. All of it. Theater. And my son sat right there and watched her perform and said nothing. I turned around. "How long have you known me, Margaret?" 31 years. "In 31 years, have you ever known me to be a cruel man?" She didn't hesitate. "No. I've known you to be one of the fairest men I've ever met. I've watched you pay contractors who tried to cheat you just so their kids would have Christmas. I've watched you eat a loss rather than take a family's house. You are not a cruel man, William." "Then I need you to help me do this the right way," I said. "Because I'll be honest with you. Right now, holding that email, I could be cruel. Right now, there's a part of me that wants to walk onto that property Saturday morning in front of all her certain kind of people and burn the whole thing to the ground. I could do it. It's my land. I could have them all removed like trespassers." I shook my head. "But that's not what Sarah would want. That's not the man she married. And it's not the lesson." Margaret leaned forward. "Then what is the lesson, William? Tell me plainly, because if I'm going to help you, I need to understand exactly what you're trying to do. Are we protecting your property? Are we punishing him? Are we trying to save him? Those are 3 different things, and they need 3 different plans." That stopped me. Because she was right, and because I hadn't let myself ask it that clearly. I came back and sat down across from her. "I keep thinking about the day his mother died," I said. "She made me promise I wouldn't let him grow up angry, and I kept that promise. He didn't grow up angry. But I think I misunderstood what she was asking. I think she was asking me not to let bitterness poison him, and instead I heard never let him hurt. And so I never did. I caught every fall. I paid off every mistake. I made his whole life so soft that he never developed the thing you only get from hitting the ground a spine." "Character?" Margaret said. "Character." I agreed. "You can't give somebody character, Margaret. I tried. 30 years I tried to hand it to him like it was a set of car keys. It doesn't work that way. The only way anybody ever gets it is by wanting something and being told no. By falling and having nobody there to catch them. By losing something they thought was already theirs." I tapped the email on the table. She wrote it herself. "Once the estate transfer is complete, they think it's already done. They think that land is theirs. My son is walking around right now believing he's already inherited $12 million from a father he's ashamed of." I felt my jaw tighten. "So the lesson is this," I said. "I'm going to let him find out it isn't his, not out of spite, Because it's the first true thing anyone will have told that boy in years. Everything he thinks he has because his father gave it to him. And the moment his father stops giving, he's going to find out who he actually is. And so am I. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. And if the answer is ugly, if you take it away and he never comes back, if all you find out is that your son loved your money and not you, have you made peace with that, William? Because that's a real possibility. You could do all this and end up alone, having proven a point to a son who walks away for good. I looked at her, and I told her the truth. No, I said, I haven't made peace with it. I don't think I ever could. But I'll tell you what I have made peace with. I would rather know than keep pretending. She used that word, and it's the truest word in the whole email. Pretending. My son and I have been pretending too. Pretending I raised a man when I raised a boy in a man's body. Pretending love and money are the same thing when they were never the same thing. I'd rather lose him for real than keep him for a check. Margaret nodded slowly. And then she did something she almost never does. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine the same way she did at Sarah's funeral. All right, she said. Then we do it clean, we do it legal. And we do it in a way you can live with when you're lying awake at night, which you will be. She pulled out a legal pad. Tell me about the transfer. Where exactly does it stand? You drew it up, I said. I want you to say it out loud. I want you certain. I took a breath. 3 years ago, I bought the Hillcrest property. 40 acres, the stone house, all of it. $12 million. I bought it in cash through the holding company so nobody would know it was me because I wanted it to be a surprise. The plan was to sign the deed over to Ethan as a wedding gift after the ceremony. You have the transfer documents drawn up and ready. But I never signed the final page. The gift was never made. So as of this morning, Margaret finished, you own it outright, free and clear. Ethan has no legal interest in it whatsoever. Not a square foot. And the wedding, I said, is scheduled to take place there in 5 days, she said, on the assumption, presumably Emily's assumption, that the property either already belongs to Ethan or is a formality. Did they ever ask you for written permission to use it? I thought back, and this is the part that still amazes me even now. No, I said slowly. They never asked. Ethan mentioned they'd picked a venue, and I assumed he meant they'd found some place and I was going to surprise them at the reception by announcing it was theirs. He never said the words, "Can we use your land?" He just acted like it was his, because in his mind it already was. Margaret wrote something on her pad, and when she looked up, there was something almost sad in her eyes. Do you understand what that means, William? He didn't even feel he needed to ask. That's how completely he assumed it was already his. He was that sure. And there it was. That was the twist of the knife I hadn't seen until Margaret held it up to the light. It wasn't just that they wanted me gone. It was that they were so certain of the outcome, so sure the old man had already served his purpose and signed his fortune away, that it never once occurred to my own son to ask his father's permission to stand on his father's land. I sat with that for a long moment, and something hardened in me that I don't think ever fully softened again. Here's what we're going to do, I said. You're going to send a formal notice, not to Ethan, to the venue coordinator, the caterer, whoever's running the logistics. Written from you on your letterhead, a simple factual statement that the Hillcrest property is privately owned, that no authorization has been granted for any event to take place there, and that any such event would constitute trespass on private land. Margaret's pen stopped. You want them to find out from the coordinator, not from you. I want them to find out the way the rest of the world finds out things, I said. Cold, official, with no father there to soften it. For once in his life, I want Ethan to run into a wall I didn't build a door in. And the timing. I thought about it. And this is where I surprised myself, because a crueler man would have waited until Saturday morning until the guests were seated and the music was playing and let it all collapse in public. And God help me, part of me wanted that. Part of me wanted them to feel in front of everyone the way I'd felt alone in my kitchen. But I couldn't do it. That wasn't the lesson. That was just pain for pain's sake. And I'd promised a dying woman I wouldn't let her son grow up around that kind of poison. Send it Saturday morning, I heard myself say anyway. And then, no, wait. Margaret looked up. I closed my eyes. I saw Ethan at 15, telling me he couldn't hit the part of himself that was scared. I saw him at 12, asking if his mother was going to die. And I understood that whatever I did in the next 5 days was going to be the last real thing I ever taught my son, one way or another. Send it Saturday morning, I said again, and this time I meant it, and I opened my eyes. But I want one thing understood, Margaret. The moment he calls me, and he will call me the second that venue falls through, the first person he'll call is his father, because that's what he's always done. I'm not going to lie to him. I'm not going to pretend it was a mix-up or a bank error. When my son asks me what happened, I am going to tell him the truth to his face. All of it. The email, the land, everything I forgot to teach him. He deserves the truth, and I deserve to finally give it to him. Margaret set down her pen. She looked at me for a long moment across that kitchen table where she'd helped me plan a funeral and a business and a life. You know what I think, William, she said quietly. I think this was never really about the property. I think you'd give that land away tomorrow if you thought it would make him whole. I think you're about to do the hardest thing a father can do. What's that? Let your child fall, she said, when you're strong enough to catch him, and stand there with your hands at your sides, and watch. I didn't answer her. I couldn't, because she'd said out loud the exact thing that had been sitting on my chest all night like a stone. She gathered her papers and stood to leave. At the door she paused and turned back. I'll have the notice drafted by tomorrow. I'll send it Saturday at 9 a.m. sharp like we discussed. But William. She waited until I looked at her. Between now and then, you're going to want to call him. You're going to lie awake and miss him and want to undo the whole thing. And I can't stop you. But I want you to remember one thing when your hand reaches for that phone. What's that? She tapped the folder on the table, the one with the email inside. He had 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks to call you and warn you. 2 weeks to say, Dad, something's wrong, she's asking me to choose. 2 weeks to be half the man he told you he wanted to be, and in 2 weeks he didn't call you once. And then she left, and I was alone again in that house full of pencil marks and photographs, and 30 years of a love that had somehow turned into a debt someone thought they'd paid off. I stood in the kitchen a long time after her car pulled out of the drive. Then I picked up the email one more time, and I read that last line again, the one that hurt the most. Ethan will come around. He always does. And I said out loud to the empty room, in a voice I barely recognized as mine. Not this time, sweetheart. This time, so will I. I put the folder in the drawer. I closed it. And for the next 5 days, no matter how many times my hand reached for that phone in the middle of the night, I did not call my son. I let the wall come. Those 5 days were the longest of my life since the week Sarah spent dying. I kept myself busy the way men like me always do. I went to job sites I didn't need to visit. I checked on crews who didn't need checking. I rearranged a tool shed that had been fine for 10 years. And every night I came home to that quiet house, and I lay awake, and I'll admit it to you plainly because there's no point lying now. A dozen times my hand found that phone in the dark. A dozen times I got as far as his name on the screen, my thumb hovering over it. And a dozen times I heard Margaret's voice. He had 2 weeks. He didn't call you once. So I set the phone down, every single time. Saturday came the way hard days always come, too fast and too slow at once. I was awake before dawn. I made coffee I didn't drink. And at 9 o'clock I sat at my kitchen table and I stared at my phone, and I knew that somewhere across town, Margaret Hayes was pressing send on an email that was about to end the life my son thought he was living. I didn't feel triumphant. I want you to understand that. I felt sick. I felt like a man who'd set a bone that had healed wrong. You have to break it again to fix it, and knowing that doesn't make the sound of it any easier to bear. 9:04. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. 2 words. It's sent. I set the phone face down on the table, and I waited. I want to tell you what I imagined was happening on the other side of town, because I found out most of it later, some from Ethan, some from the coordinator, some from pieces I put together over the following weeks. The caterer had already arrived. The flowers were being set out. Emily's certain kind of people were beginning to trickle in wearing their pale linen and their expensive sunglasses. And then a woman with a clipboard, the venue coordinator, a no-nonsense professional named Denise, who I'd never met and never spoke to, got an email on her phone from a law office she'd never heard of, informing her that the property she was standing on was privately owned and that no authorization existed for any event to be held there. Denise, God bless her, did exactly what a professional does. She stopped everything. I know the timeline now. 9/11, she found the wedding planner. 9/14, the wedding planner found Emily. And somewhere around 9:20, according to what Ethan told me later, Emily walked over to my son in her getting ready clothes, holding her phone, and said the sentence that started the collapse. Ethan, there's a problem with the venue. They're saying we're not allowed to be here. And Ethan, my soft, trusting 30-year-old son, who had spent his whole life believing that any problem could be handled by the right phone call to the right person, said the most natural thing in the world. He said, "That's impossible. This place is basically ours. Let me call my dad. He'll straighten it out." He'll straighten it out. 30 years old, and his first instinct when the ground moved under him was still exactly what it had been when he was 5. Call Dad. Dad fixes things. My phone rang at 9:26. I let it ring. Not out of cruelty, out of something closer to fear. I looked at his name lighting up my screen. Ethan. And my whole body wanted to grab it and say, "It's all right, son. I'll take care of it." 30 years of muscle memory screaming at me to catch him. I let it ring 4 times. Then I answered. "Hello, Ethan. Dad? Oh, thank God. Listen, there's some kind of insane mix-up at the venue. The coordinator got some crazy email saying we're not authorized to be here or something. I don't even understand. Can you call whoever you need to call and fix it? Guests are showing up, Dad. The ceremony's in a couple hours." His voice was fast and light and unbothered. That's the thing that got me. He wasn't scared. He wasn't even really upset. He was mildly inconvenienced the way you are when a flight gets delayed because in his whole life a problem had never once been something that couldn't be handed to his father. I closed my eyes. "There's no mix-up, son," I said. A pause. "What? There's no mix-up. The notice is correct. You don't have authorization to be on that property because that property doesn't belong to you. It belongs to me." Silence. I could hear the party sounds behind him, a violin tuning someone laughing. And then his voice again, slower now, the lightness draining out of it. "Dad, what are you talking about? This is our venue. This is where we're getting married." "I know it is," I said. "It's a beautiful piece of land. 40 acres, stone house. I bought it 3 years ago, Ethan. $12 million cash through the holding company, so it'd be a surprise." A surprise. "It was going to be your wedding gift," I said, and my voice held steadier than I had any right to expect. "I was going to sign the deed over to you after the ceremony, stand up at the reception and hand you the keys to your own home. That was the plan. That was the surprise I'd been keeping for 2 years. I heard him breathing. I heard the violin stop, but I never signed it, son. The transfer was never made, so legally right now every blade of grass you're standing on is mine. And I did not give anyone permission to hold a wedding on it." 10 seconds of silence. It felt like 10 years. Then his voice came back, and it had changed completely. It had gone tight and high and furious. "You did this. You did this on purpose. You canceled our wedding." "I didn't cancel anything," I said. "You can still get married today. You can find a courthouse, a park, a friend's backyard, a church. What you can't do is do it on my land after your fiancé decided I'm not welcome in your life." "This is insane," he said, and now his voice was shaking. You're punishing me. You're ruining the most important day of my life because your feelings got hurt over a phone call. Do you have any idea how many people are here right now? Do you have any idea what this looks like? And there it was. Do you have any idea what this looks like? Not, Dad. I'm sorry I said you'd embarrass me. Not, Dad. Why did you buy me a $12 million home and never tell me? His concern in the moment his world was coming apart was what it looked like, to them, to her certain kind of people. Something in me that had been holding on very tight finally let go. You want to talk about what things look like? I said, and my voice dropped low. Let me tell you what things look like from where I'm sitting, Ethan. 2 weeks ago, your fiancée wrote an email. She meant to send it to someone else, but it came to my attorney's office by mistake. You want to know what it said? Silence. It said, once the estate transfer is complete, we won't have to keep pretending. The old man doesn't belong in the life we're building. My throat tightened, but I pushed through it. The old man, Ethan. That's me. That's what she calls the father who paid for the ring on her finger. And then she wrote one more line. She wrote, Ethan will come around. He always does. I heard him make a sound, a small involuntary sound like the wind had gone out of him. Dad, she was counting on my land, I said. She had the whole thing timed. Wait for the old man to sign over his fortune, then throw him out with the trash. And she was so sure of it, son. She was so sure of you that she wrote it down. He always does. She knew you'd fold. Tell me she was wrong. Tell me in 2 weeks you tried once to defend me. Tell me you told her no. Nothing. Just his breathing ragged now. You can't, I said quietly. Because you didn't. Dad, you don't understand. It wasn't like that, she. Then explain it to me, I said. But not on the phone, not with 100 of her relatives standing around. You want to explain it to me, you come to my house, alone, and you say it to my face. Because I have spent 30 years listening to you, Ethan, and I will give you one more chance to be heard, but I'm done being managed over the telephone. The line went quiet. And then, in a voice I hadn't heard from him since he was a boy, small and lost, he said, The guests, Emily. What am I supposed to? That's not my problem anymore, son, I said. That's the thing about being a grown man. You handle it. You figure it out. For the first time in your life, there's no one standing behind you to catch you. I paused. I'll be here when you're ready to talk. The real talk. Not the managed one. And I hung up. And then I set the phone down, and I put both hands flat on the table to stop them shaking. And I sat there, and I did not cry, though God knows it was close. The next few hours I got in pieces later, and I'll tell you what I learned, because you should know how it fell apart. The wedding didn't happen. Of course it didn't. There was no backup venue. Emily had wanted this one, only this one, because it photographed well and it impressed the right people. And now the right people were standing on a lawn, being politely told there'd been a problem, and the event was canceled. I heard there was a scene. I heard Emily cried, though I've since come to believe those were tears of rage and not heartbreak. I heard her mother demanded to speak to someone, anyone, and that Denise, the coordinator saint, that she was simply repeated that the property owner had not authorized the event, and there was nothing to be done. And somewhere in all that I heard Emily turned on my son. Because here's the thing about people who love you for your usefulness. The moment you stop being useful, the love evaporates so fast, it's like it was never there. And the second it became clear that Ethan didn't own the land, that his father hadn't signed it over, that the $12 million was not in fact sitting in the bank waiting for them, the woman who was supposed to marry him in 2 hours looked at him differently. I know this because Ethan told me later, and his voice broke when he said it. She looked at me, Dad, he said, in front of everyone, and she said, You told me it was handled. You told me the estate was ours. Like I'd lied to her. Like the whole thing was my fault. And I realized, standing there in my suit with all those people watching, I realized she wasn't upset about us. She was upset about the house. But that came later. That afternoon, I just sat in my kitchen and waited. He came at 4 o'clock. I heard the car in this drive, and I heard the door, and then I heard him in the front hall, and when he came into the kitchen, he was still wearing part of his wedding suit, the tie gone, the collar open, and he looked like a man who'd aged 5 years and 5 hours. And I'll tell you, the second I saw him, every hard thing in me wanted to crumble. Every instinct I have as a father wanted to get up and put my arms around him and say, it's all right, Dad's here. 30 years of habit, all of it screaming. I stayed in my chair. Sit down, son, I said. He sat. Across the table from me, in the same chair Margaret had sat in 5 days before. And for a long moment, neither of us said anything. Then he put his face in his hands. Is it true? He said, muffled. The email. Is that really what she wrote? I got up, went to the drawer, took out the folder, and set it in front of him. Read it yourself. He read it. I watched his face while he read it, and I saw the exact moment it landed, the moment the last line hit him. Ethan will come around, he always does. I saw my son's face just fall, collapse inward. And he set the paper down, and he looked at me, and his eyes were wet. She's been telling me for months, he said so quietly I had to lean in. For months, Dad, that you didn't fit, that you'd hold us back with her family, that I needed to choose the life we were building over the life I came from. And I kept telling myself she didn't mean it like it sounded. I kept making excuses for her. Because his voice cracked completely. Because I wanted her to be right about me. I wanted to be the kind of man her family respected. And somewhere in there, I let her make me ashamed of you. I didn't say anything. I couldn't yet. And the worst part, he went on, and now the tears were coming freely, this 30-year-old man crying at my kitchen table. The worst part is that phone call. When I called you and told you not to come, I hung up and I felt sick, Dad. I felt sick the second I did it, and I almost called you back 100 times, but I didn't. Because calling you back meant telling Emily no, and I was more afraid of disappointing her than I was of hurting you. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. What kind of son does that? What kind of man is more afraid of his fiancée than he is of betraying the father who raised him alone? And that right there was the thing I'd been waiting 5 days to hear. Not an apology about the land. Not a word about the $12 million. He hadn't even mentioned it. He was sitting in the wreckage of the wealthiest day of his life, and the only thing he was grieving was me. I felt something in my chest come loose that had been clenched tight for 5 days. But I wasn't finished. Because this was the lesson, and I'd promised myself I'd give it to him whole. Let me tell you something, Ethan, I said, and my voice was rough. You want to know why I never signed that paper? It wasn't revenge. I need you to hear that. When you told me I'd embarrass you, I didn't decide to punish you. I decided to find out something. I decided to find out whether my son needed his father, or whether he only needed what his father owned. Because for 30 years, son, I couldn't tell the difference. And I was so afraid, that if I ever stopped paying, stopped fixing, stopped catching you, there'd be nothing underneath. That I'd raised a boy who loved my checkbook and tolerated the man who signed the checks. He flinched like I'd hit him. And you want to know the truth, I went on. That fear was mine, not yours. Because I made you that way. I did. Every time you fell, I caught you before you hit the ground, and I told myself that was love. It wasn't. It was fear. I was so scared of losing you the way I lost your mother, that I never let you feel a single hard thing. And soft ground grows soft men, son. That's on me, not on you, on me. Ethan was staring at me now, tears streaming completely still. Dad, I'm not done, I said. Because here's what today was really about. It wasn't about the wedding. It wasn't about the land. It was about this, right here. This is the first time in your entire life that I let you fall and didn't catch you. And you know what happened? My voice broke finally after 5 days of holding. You got up. You didn't fall apart. You didn't call me to fix it a second time. You put on what was left of your suit, and you drove to your father's house to tell the truth to his face. That's not the boy I raised, Ethan. That's a man. That's the first time I've ever met the man. And then I couldn't hold it anymore, and neither could he. And I don't mind telling you that 2 grown Carter men sat at that kitchen table and wept for Sarah for the years, for the land, for all of it. And at some point, I got up and came around the table, and I put my hand on the back of his neck the way I did when he was 15 and couldn't hit the part of himself that was scared. "You and me," I said. "We're a team. We always were. I just forgot for a while that a team means both of you carry weight, not one of you carrying it all." He grabbed my arm and held on like he was drowning. "I'm so sorry, Dad," he said into my shirt. "I'm so sorry. I chose wrong. I chose so wrong." "I know, son," I said. "I know you did." And I held on to my boy while the sun went down, and for the first time in 5 days, for the first time in maybe 2 years, I felt like I might not have lost him after all. But even then, holding him, I knew we weren't done. Because forgiveness is one thing, trust is another. And a man doesn't rebuild in one afternoon what took 2 years to fall down. There was still Emily to deal with. There was still the question of the land of the trust of what came next. And there was still the hardest thing of all sitting between us unspoken, the thing I hadn't yet decided. Whether I could ever really give him that estate, or whether the greatest gift I could give my son now was to make him earn it. Ethan stayed at my house that night. He didn't ask to. He just didn't leave. Around 7 o'clock, he was still sitting at the kitchen table, and I made us both grilled cheese sandwiches the way I used to when he was small, because neither of us had eaten, and neither of us knew what else to do. And there's a kind of comfort in a father cooking for his grown son that neither of us had words for. He ate 2 of them. He said it was the first thing that had tasted like anything all day, and around 9, his phone rang. I watched his face change when he saw the name. He turned the phone toward me without a word. It said, "Emily." We both stared at it. It rang, and then it stopped. Then it started again immediately. She called 4 times in a row, and each time Ethan just sat there looking at it, and I could see the war going on inside him. 30 years of a man who couldn't stand to disappoint anyone, fighting against everything he'd learned in the last 12 hours. "You don't have to answer it," I said quietly. "I know," he said. And then, "But I think I need to. Not for her, for me. I need to hear what she says. I think I need to hear it out loud, so I stop making excuses in my head." That surprised me. That was not the boy who couldn't tell his fiancée no. So I nodded and I said, "Then answer it, but put it on speaker, not so I can hear, so you can." Sometimes a thing sounds different out loud than it does pressed against your ear in the dark. He looked at me a long moment. Then he pressed the button and set the phone on the table between us. "Emily." Her voice came through and it was sharp as broken glass. "Where the hell did you go? You just left. You left me standing there in front of everyone. Do you understand what today did to me? My mother is humiliated. My entire family drove in for nothing. Do you have any idea?" "Emily," Ethan said. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" The question seemed to confuse her. "Am I? Of course I'm not okay. I just had my wedding blown up by your lunatic father." "That's not what I asked," Ethan said, and I heard something new in his voice, something steadier. "I asked if you were hurt. Not humiliated. Hurt. Because I've been sitting here for 5 hours. Emily and I keep waiting for you to ask me one question, and you haven't asked it yet." "What question?" "You haven't once asked me if I'm okay," Ethan said. "Not one time. You've called me 4 times, and the first words out of your mouth every time have been about your mother and your family and how it looks. You haven't asked how I'm doing. You haven't asked me how I feel about my own father and I not speaking. You just want to know when I'm going to fix the house situation." There was a pause, and then Emily said the thing that ended it. She didn't know she was ending it. That's the part I'll never forget. She thought she was being reasonable. "Ethan, I don't have time for you to have a moment right now. We need to figure out the estate. Your father clearly did this to get attention, so you need to go over there and smooth it over and get him to sign the papers, because without that property, we don't have anything to build on. So can you please stop being dramatic and go fix your family? Go fix your family. Get him to sign the papers. Without that property, we don't have anything." I watched my son's face while she said it. And I watched something in him go very still and very quiet. The same stillness I'd felt in my own chest 5 days earlier when he told me I'd embarrass him. It's a particular kind of quiet. It's the quiet of the last excuse dying. "Emily," Ethan said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. If my father had already signed that land over to me, if we owned it free and clear right now, $12 million all ours, would you still want to marry me?" "What kind of question is that?" "Of course, we're getting married, Ethan. That's not what I asked. I asked if the money weren't there, if it was just me, Ethan, a guy who works a normal job and has a dad in construction and a house with pencil marks on the wall, no estate, no inheritance, just me. Would you still be on this phone right now?" The silence went on too long. That was the answer. The silence was the whole answer. And then she made it worse because she tried to answer. "Ethan, that's not a fair question. Life is complicated. You can't just—" "Yeah," he said softly. "You're right. It's not a fair question. Because I already know the answer. My dad knew it 2 weeks ago. He knew it before I did. He's known it this whole time, and he tried to tell me, and I called him an embarrassment to defend you." "Ethan." "We're done, Emily," my son said. "And I have never in my life been prouder of 3 words. I hope you find whatever it is you're actually looking for. But it was never me. It was the house, and I'm not the house." And he hung up. And then he sat there staring at the phone, and his hands were shaking, and he said in a very small voice, "I think I just ended my engagement." "Yeah," I said. "You did." "On my wedding day." "Yeah." And then he laughed. It came out cracked and broken, and half a sob, but it was a real laugh, and I hadn't heard my son really laugh in longer than I could remember. "God, Dad, what a day. What an absolute catastrophe of a day. Best day you've had in 2 years, I said. And he looked at me, and something in his face told me he knew I was right. She called 11 more times that night. He didn't answer any of them. Around midnight, the calls turned into texts, and I watched him read them, and I watched them change the way they always do. First it was anger, then it was apology, then it was, "I didn't mean it, I was stressed, we can fix this." And then when none of that worked, the last one came in, and Ethan read it, and just handed the phone to me without a word. It said, "You're going to regret throwing this away. You'll never do better than me, and you know it. Enjoy your little life with your loser father." Your loser father. I handed the phone back. "Well," I said, "at least she finally said what she meant." And Ethan looked at that message, and then he looked at me, and he did something that mended a crack in me I didn't know was still there. He blocked her number. Right in front of me. Deliberately. And then he set the phone face down and pushed it away and said, "I've spent 2 years afraid of that woman's opinion of me. And it turns out her opinion of me was wallet. I'm done being somebody's wallet. That's my boy," I thought. Somewhere in there, under all the years I softened, there was always my boy. He slept in his old room that night. I heard him moving around in there, and at one point I passed the door, and I heard him crying quiet, and I stood in the hall with my hand raised to knock, and then I stopped. Because I understood that this was some of that hard ground he needed to walk on his own. So I let him grieve, and I went to bed, and for the first time in 5 nights, I slept the whole way through. The next morning over coffee we talked, really talked the way we hadn't in years. And it wasn't easy, and it wasn't all warm, because I'd made a decision and I had to tell him, and I knew it might undo some of what we'd just rebuilt. "Ethan," I said, "I need to talk to you about the land." He held up a hand. "Dad, you don't have to give me that. I don't want it, not after all this. It feels like blood money now. I don't want the thing that almost cost me you." And there it was. Again, that thing that kept catching me off guard. He didn't want it. My son, who Emily had bet the whole game on being unable to walk away from $12 million, was pushing it away with both hands. Which, of course, was exactly why I'd decided what I decided. "I hear you," I said. But I'm not going to let you throw it away either, because that's just the same mistake in the other direction. Sit down. Let me tell you what I've decided, and then you can have your say." He sat. "I'm not giving you the estate," I said. "Not the way I planned. Not as a wedding gift. Not as an inheritance. Not as a here you go, son handout. Because I finally understand that's what got us here. I've been handing you things your whole life, and every single thing I handed you made you a little softer and a little more certain that things just come to people like you. That's not your fault, that's mine. But I'm not going to make that mistake again." His face fell a little, and I saw the old fear flash across it, the little boy afraid he'd disappointed his father, and I pushed right through it because he needed to hear the rest. "So here's what I'm going to do instead," I said. "I'm putting that property into a trust, and I'm putting you in charge of it. Not owning it, running it. Because that land is 40 acres and a house and a whole lot of possibility, and I've decided I want it to be good for something more than a rich kid's wedding photos. I want to do something with it, something that matters, and I want you to help me build it, not inherit it, build it, with your own 2 hands the way I built everything you've ever had." He was staring at me. "Build what, Dad?" "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "That's the part we figure out together. But I know this. For 30 years I built a company and a fortune and a life, and I did all of it for you, and somewhere along the way, I forgot the most important thing my own father never taught me, and I swore I'd teach you. Money is inherited, son. Character is earned. You can't give a man character. He has to build it one hard day at a time, wanting things and being told to work for them. I robbed you of that, out of love, but I robbed you all the same. And I'm not going to hand you $12 million and rob you of it one last time." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, and then he said something that told me he'd understood all the way down. "You're not taking it away from me," he said slowly. "You're giving me a chance to actually earn it. That's Dad, that's the first thing anybody's offered me in years that doesn't come with strings. Everything Emily's family offered me came with a price. This is the first thing that comes with a job." "That's exactly right," I said, and I felt my throat go tight. "You always were smart, son. You just spent a while forgetting it." He wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand and he laughed that cracked laugh again. "So what do we do? Where do we even start?" "We start small," I said. "We start honest. And Ethan, I want to be clear about one thing. This isn't going to be easy, and it isn't going to be fast, and I'm not going to catch you anymore when you stumble. If you take this on, you take it on as a man. I'll be right beside you. But I won't be underneath you. Not ever again." He reached across the table, and he shook my hand firm, the way I taught him, the way Gus, the old Marine, taught me 45 years ago. "Deal," he said. And that handshake meant more to me than any deed I could ever have signed. Over the following weeks, we found out what happened to Emily in pieces the way you do. She married someone else within the year, someone with family money to match her own. Someone who came pre-approved by all her certain kind of people. And I'll tell you honestly, when Ethan heard, I watched his face carefully, waiting for the old hurt. But it wasn't there. He just shook his head and said, "Good for her. I hope he keeps his receipts." And that was all. He was free of her all the way through. I never hated Emily. I want you to know that because I think it matters. There's a part of every story like this where you're supposed to want the villain to suffer. And I understand the appeal. But I'm 63 years old, and I've learned that hating people just ties you to them. Emily was a young woman who'd been taught that people are worth what they can provide. And that's a poisoned way to move through the world. And I felt something almost like pity for her. She'll spend her whole life surrounded by people who love her the exact way she loved my son. For the house, for the money, for what she provides. And one day she'll be old, and she'll find out what that kind of love is worth when the money stops. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. So no, I didn't celebrate her. I just closed the door and turned back toward my son. But there was one more conversation I needed to have with Ethan. And it was the hardest one of all, because it wasn't about Emily, or the land, or the trust. It was about his mother. We were sitting on my back steps one evening, a few weeks after all of it, and out of nowhere, Ethan said, Do you think Mom would be ashamed of me for how I acted? And I had to think about that. I owed him a real answer, not a comfortable one. No, I said finally. I don't think she'd be ashamed. I think she'd be sad. There's a difference. She made me promise right before she died that I wouldn't let you grow up angry. And I kept that promise, Ethan. Maybe too well. I kept you so protected from every hard thing that you never learned the hard things make you who you are. If your mother would be disappointed in anyone, it'd be me, not you. Because I was supposed to raise a man, and instead I spent 30 years raising a boy I was too scared to ever let grow up. Ethan was quiet, and then he said, "You're being too hard on yourself, Dad." Maybe, I said. But your mother also told me one other thing that night. She said, loving someone doesn't mean protecting them from every consequence. I didn't understand it then. I understand it now. I finally let you face a consequence, son. The biggest one of your life. And instead of it destroying you, it woke you up. So maybe I got it right in the end. 30 years late. But in the end. He leaned his shoulder against mine the way he used to when he was a kid, and we sat there on those steps as the light went too. Carterman and I thought about Sarah, and I thought about how she'd have loved to see this. Not the money, not the estate, none of that. Just this. Her husband and her son sitting close honest with each other at last. Dad, Ethan said after a while, I know what I want to do with the land. Yeah, he said. And when he told me I had to look away for a second so he wouldn't see my eyes. Because it was good. It was better than anything I'd have thought of. It was the idea of a man who'd finally figured out what things are actually worth. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because before any of that could happen, before the land became what it became, my son had to prove to me and to himself that the change was real, that it would hold, that the man who showed up at my kitchen table in a broken wedding suit was here to stay and not just a good week from a boy who'd had a scare. And he did. Every single day he did. The idea Ethan told me on those back steps was this. He wanted to turn the estate into a place that gave back to the exact kind of people we came from. Firefighters, teachers, veterans, working families drowning under medical bills, the people who build things and fix things and keep the world running and never once get invited onto 40 acres with a stone house and a view that stops your heart. He wanted the land that was supposed to impress Emily's certain kind of people to become a place for our kind of people. And when he said it, I had to look away because it was so exactly right that it hurt. But wanting a thing and building a thing are two different animals, and I told him so. That's a beautiful idea, son, I said. Now show me you can do it, because ideas are cheap. I've had 1,000 of them. The men who matter are the ones who pick up the hammer the next morning. And here's where I'll tell you the truth about the months that followed because I promised you honesty, and I won't stop now. It was hard. It was slow. And more than once I watched my son want to quit, and I had to sit on my hands and let him find his own way, through which is the hardest thing a father who spent 30 years catching his boy will ever do. The first month Ethan quit his job, the comfortable going-nowhere job Emily's family had helped him land, and he came to work for me. Not in an office. On the cruise. I put him with Danny Ruiz, my foreman, a man who'd carried lumber for me for 20 years and didn't care whose son you were. And Danny worked him. God did Danny work him. First week, Ethan came home with blisters that broke and bled and hands so stiff he couldn't hold a fork. And one night, about 10 days in, he sat at my kitchen table and he said, Dad, I don't know if I can do this. My whole body hurts. Danny treats me like I'm nobody. And every cell in my body wanted to say, You're right, son. Come work in the office. I'll set you up nice. 30 years of habit screaming at me. Instead, I said, You're not nobody, Ethan. But you're not somebody yet either. You're a man who's spent 30 years having things handed to him, learning what it feels like to earn one. Danny's not being cruel. Danny's being fair. And you've never had anybody be fair to you before because I was too busy being easy on you. So you can quit. Nobody'll stop you. Or you can go back tomorrow and show Danny Ruiz what a Carter is made of. He went back the next morning. He didn't say a word about quitting again. By the second month, his hands had toughened. By the third, Danny stopped calling him the boss's kid and started calling him Carter, which from Danny is practically a medal. And somewhere in there, I watched my son change in a way that money never could have changed him. He started standing straighter. He started looking men in the eye. He started understanding the weight of a dollar because he finally knew what it cost a body to earn one. And the land! We started working the land on weekends, the two of us, and whoever we could rope in, clearing brush, fixing the old house. And here's the thing that got me. Ethan didn't hire it out. He could have. There was money in the trust for it. But he insisted on doing the work himself, and when I asked him why, he said something I've never forgotten. Because Emily's whole world was about paying other people to make you look good, he said, wiping sweat off his face with his forearm. I don't want to look good, Dad. I want to be good. There's a difference. You taught me that. Took me 30 years to hear it, but you taught me. I had to walk off into the trees for a minute after he said that. A man my age hiding in the woods so his son wouldn't see him cry. Now, I want to tell you about a moment that tested everything, because no story worth telling goes smooth all the way to the end, and this one didn't either. About 5 months in, we hit a wall. The old house needed a new roof and a full electrical system before it could ever host anyone, and the numbers came back brutal, more than the trust could easily absorb without gutting the whole plan. And I sat Ethan down, and I showed him the figures, and I watched him do the math, and I saw the old temptation flicker across his face. You could just unlock more of the trust, he said carefully. You have the money, Dad. You could write a check, and this whole problem goes away. And there it was, the test. The old Ethan, the one who solved problems by finding someone to pay for them, still alive in there, just under the surface. And I'll be honest with you, I almost failed the test myself, because I did have the money, and it would have been so easy. And I loved him, and I wanted to give him the win. Instead, I said, I could. You're right. So let me ask you something, son. If I write that check, whose project is this, mine or yours? He was quiet. Because the second I bail you out, I said, it goes back to being Dad's estate that Dad paid for, and you go back to being the boy who watched. Is that what you want? No, he said low. No, it's not. Then figure it out, I said, like a man. You've got a problem and not enough money. Welcome to every day of my entire life. That's not a disaster, Ethan. That's just Tuesday. Now go solve it. And you know what my son did? He didn't come back to me for a check. He spent 2 weeks on the phone, and he called in favors, and he found a veterans organization that would supply volunteer labor if we'd make the finished place available to veteran families first. He found a retired electrician who'd donate his time to teach a crew of vets to do the wiring as job training. He turned a money problem into a partnership, and he made the project better in the process, because now the people it was built for were building it themselves. When he laid it all out for me, I just sat there and stared at him. And he got nervous and said, "What, is it a bad plan?" "No, son," I said, and my voice cracked right in half. "It's a better plan than I ever could have made. You didn't just solve the problem. You solved it in a way that made everything more true to what it's supposed to be. That's not something I taught you. That's something you've got in you. That was always in you. I just finally got out of the way long enough to let it come out. It took nearly a year all told. A year of weekends and blisters and setbacks and small victories. And the whole time, not once did Ethan mention Emily or the wedding that didn't happen or the life he'd almost had. That whole future he'd been so afraid to lose it turned out was a future he was relieved to be free of. He told me once near the end, I used to lie awake worrying whether her family thought I was good enough. Now I lie awake tired from actual work, and I sleep like a baby. I didn't know it could feel like this, Dad. I didn't know a life could feel like it was actually mine. And then came the day. A year almost to the week after the wedding that fell apart on that same land. We held the first event. Not a wedding, not a luxury party, not a gathering of anybody's certain kind of people. It was a day for working families, firefighters and teachers and veterans and folks buried under medical bills they'd never asked for. Free food, free help. People who'd never been made to feel welcome anywhere fancy, welcomed onto 40 acres like they owned the place, because in the way that mattered they did. And I want to tell you about a moment from that day, because it's the moment this whole story was always heading toward, though I didn't know it until I saw it. There was an old veteran there. 80s maybe. Vietnam, I found out later. He'd come with his daughter, and he was frail, and there was a stack of donation boxes that needed carrying from a truck up to the house. And before anyone could organize it, before anyone gave a single instruction, I saw my son cross the whole property, and I watched him walk up to that old man, and I watched him say something, and the old man laughed, and then Ethan picked up the heaviest box himself and walked beside him. Slow, matching the old man's pace, carrying his load, and talking with him the whole way like they'd known each other for years. Nobody was watching. That's the part that undid me. There were no cameras, no crowd, no one taking pictures for anyone's certain kind of people to admire. My son didn't know I was looking. He was just doing it because it was right, because there was a man who needed a hand, and Ethan had two good ones. And I stood there 64 years old now, and I finally understood something I'd been circling my whole life without ever landing on. I'd spent 35 years thinking my greatest achievement would be the fortune I built, the company, the estate, the $12 million I was so proud to be able to hand my son. And I'd have handed it to him a year ago, and it would have destroyed him, and I never would have known, because I'd have been so busy being generous that I'd have missed the fact that generosity given wrong is just a slower kind of harm. The greatest gift I ever gave my son wasn't the land. It was the day I refused to give it to him. It was the day I let him fall. It was the phone call where I said understood and hung up and did not fix it. That was the gift, not the money. The no. The one no, after 30 years of yeses, that finally gave my son room to become someone. I watched Ethan set that box down at the top of the hill, and I watched him shake the old veteran's hand and clap him on the shoulder, and then I watched him turn and scan the crowd until he found me. And when our eyes met across all those people, he didn't wave, he didn't shout. He just gave me a small nod. The nod one man gives another. Not a boy to his father, a man to a man he respects. And I nodded back. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, the two of us sat on the steps of that stone house, the same steps where a wedding was supposed to happen and didn't, and Ethan was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Dad, can I ask you something, and will you tell me the truth?" Always. If Emily hadn't sent that email, if it had never come to Margaret's office, would you have signed the land over? Would I have gotten the estate and married her and never known the difference? I thought about it. And I gave him the honest answer because he was a man now, and men deserve honest answers. "Yeah," I said. "I would have. I'd have handed you $12 million and a wife who thought I was garbage, and I'd have smiled at your wedding and told myself I'd done right by you. And you'd have lived a whole life as a man who never got tested, married to a woman who loved your bank account, and neither of us would have ever known what you were really made of." I put my hand on his shoulder. "That email didn't ruin your life, son. That email saved it. The worst thing that ever happened to you turned out to be the best thing. That's how it goes sometimes. The floor falls out from under you, and it turns out you needed to see what was underneath." Ethan nodded slowly, and then he said, "You know what I keep thinking about that phone call? When you said understood and hung up. I've thought about it 100 times. You must have been so hurt. And you didn't yell. You didn't beg me. You just said understood and let me go. How did you do that? If I'd been you, I don't know if I could have." And I told him the truth about that too. "I'll tell you a secret, son," I said. When I said understood, I wasn't being strong. I was hurt worse than I've ever been hurt, except for the day your mother died. But I learned a long time ago that when someone shows you who they've decided to be, the worst thing you can do is argue with them. You don't beg someone to value you. You can't. It doesn't work, and it costs you the last thing you've got, which is your dignity. So I said understood, and I hung up, and I walked away. Not because I didn't care, because I cared enough to stop begging for a seat at a table where I wasn't wanted. Sometimes walking away isn't giving up, Ethan. Sometimes it's the only thing that makes a person turn around and see what they're losing. And you turned around. Thank God you turned around. He leaned into me then, and he said quiet, "I'm glad you walked away, Dad. It's the reason I found my way back." And that right there is the whole thing. That's everything I know about being a father learned too late, and just in time, all in one sentence from my son. I did eventually sign the land over to him. I want you to know that. A little over a year after the wedding that never was. I put the deed in his name, not as a gift, but as a partner, an equal. A man who'd earned every square foot of it with his own 2 hands and his own hard year. And it meant nothing to him. The ownership, the $12 million, and that's exactly how I knew he was ready for it. The boy who'd have taken it and been ruined couldn't have it. The man who didn't care about having it got to keep it. That's not a paradox. That's just how it works. The only people you can safely give the world to are the ones who don't need it. Ethan runs that place now. Every year it gets bigger, helps more families, welcomes more of our kind of people onto that land. He met a woman a while back. A nurse works nights, sharp and kind and tough as a boot. The first time he brought her to my house, she looked at the pencil marks on my kitchen wall, and she got quiet, and then she said, "You kept these, all these years?" And I said, "Yeah," and she reached out and touched the mark at age 12, and she said, "That's the year his mom passed, isn't it? That's why they stopped for a while." And I looked at Ethan, and Ethan looked at me, and we both knew. This one loves the man. She's never once mentioned the estate. My son married her last spring, on that land, under an open sky with firefighters and teachers and veterans in the folding chairs, and Danny Ruiz standing up as a groomsman with tears in his eyes, and me standing beside my boy as his best man, exactly where I belong. And when the moment came for the father to speak, I stood up, and I looked out at all those good, ordinary, extraordinary people, and I said what I'd learned. I told them a father's love should be unconditional, but respect should never be optional. I told them that the truest thing I own isn't the land under their feet. It's the man standing next to me who I almost lost, and who I got back only because I was willing to lose him. And I told them that money is inherited, but character is earned one hard day at a time, and that my son had earned more of it in 1 year than most men earn in a lifetime. And then I looked at Ethan, and I said the last thing. The thing I'd waited a lifetime to be able to say and mean all the way down. A long time ago, a scared kid told me he hoped he'd grow up to be half the man his father was. My voice broke, and I let it. Son, you didn't grow up to be half the man I am. You grew up to be twice the man. And your mother, wherever she is not ashamed, and she is not sad. She is proud. We both are. He crossed that space, and he wrapped his arms around me in front of everyone. This man who a year before couldn't say no to the wrong woman, holding on to his father without an ounce of shame, and he said in my ear, "You and me, Dad." "You and me," I said. "Always. We're a team." I'm 64 years old. I've buried the love of my life. I've built a fortune, and I've watched it nearly poison the only person I have left. And I've learned the one thing I wish I'd known 30 years sooner. The thing I'll leave you with, because if this old man's story is worth anything, it's worth this. The greatest gift you can ever give the people you love is not everything they want. It is the chance to become someone worthy of what they'll one day have. Walking away from my son was the hardest thing I ever did, and it was the day I finally started loving him the right way. And I would do it again every time, because it gave me back my child, not the boy who needed me to pay, but the man who chose to stay. That is the real inheritance, and no one can ever take it away from us again.